In chapter 14, now that we've explored all of the different theories, we're going to talk a little bit about the modern world of work and how we classify and understand different types of career paths. To frame our conversation about career exploration and career data in this chapter, we're going to talk first about the idea of occupational classification systems. So there's so many different jobs and careers out there. They're constantly changing. And so it becomes important in the world of career counseling to have some sort of centralized way of organizing and referring to different types of career classifications. That way we know we're all referencing and talking about the same thing. And that may sound very simple and very silly, but we wouldn't have things like career assessments if we didn't have a unified classification system to understand concepts of career categories. And we've already looked at in a previous chapter an example of a classification system, which is the Holland codes. So that REASET code that we were looking at, and how individuals who take an interest inventory that aligns with the Holland system would come out with a 2 or 3 letter code, and that would then help guide them to careers that would align with those types of occupational activities that are going to fit well for them. So occupational classification systems are pretty important, and the standard occupational classification system, which was last updated in 2018, is the federal system that's used by the Department of Labor, and it is a numerical method of categorizing careers. And you may think, well, why do we even need to do that? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics does a lot of work in assembling information about different types of career fields, things related to education and training, things related to matching up people's applications to different types of apprenticeships, getting data on things like job openings, projecting which careers are going to be growing over time, and then also things like salary information, so we can understand what is common and what is fair when it comes to salaries across fields. So these classifications help break down categories and then even more minute subcategories and then even more specific subcategories of career classifications. And then those are used to associate or identify each type of career. This is the system that's used in ONET Online, and it's also the system that is used by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as they put together their job reports and they organize their job reports, as you'll see linked in the module for this week. So this system is really important because we use those classifications to collect a lot of data, organize data, analyze those data, and then understand careers, understand things about unemployment, understand a lot of information that we use to make decisions about policy and funding and laws and things that impact healthcare and school counseling on a pretty regular basis. So these things are really important, and we use them really often, and it's sort of the federal basis by which we understand the idea of career classification. With that in mind, let's talk about finding information about different types of careers. So there's really 2 main resources we want to talk about here. The first is ONET Online, which is linked in the module, and I encourage you to go explore and play with. I know we've looked at it a little earlier in the class as well. It's a really great resource for working with clients and exploring different opportunities and options. And it uses that unified classification system to sort careers into different areas so that we can find what we need. The other option is the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which is developed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These used to be printed books every year that you would have to go in and purchase. I have an old one on my bookshelf in my office, and now everything's gone digital. So it's online. It's published still annually based on labor statistics that are collected throughout the years and then compiled and then put together to give us general information about training, about salary information, about projected growth in certain fields, about anything you would really want to know and understand if you're thinking about pursuing a certain career field. And so it's linked in the module. I encourage you to go poke around in it and look at the career listings specifically and see how they connect different types of similar careers together using that classification system, because there are infinite words to describe certain types of careers, but with that numerical system, we can make sure that we're all talking about the same thing and that we're compiling data about the same things in the same place. So it went into the Occupational Outlook Handbook and pulled the 2023 labor statistics data for mental health and school counselors. And you can see that presented here. So it offers the median pay. This is nationally, of course, there'd be a lot of variation in specific like regions, cities, etc. But the median pay for mental health counselors nationally is just over $53,000, which for the record is not nearly enough for the work that they do, or the equivalent of about $25 an hour. Again, not nearly enough. And then for school counselors, pulling that same data, the median pay for 23 was a little over $61,000 and a little over $29 per hour, which again, on both fronts is not really adequate pay for the work that we do. But we wouldn't really know that if we didn't have a classification system with which to collect, analyze, and organize data. So I'm very sure that you are getting really excited about the concept of data and unified classification systems of career and statistical analysis of labor. So you might be like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to go use this with my clients. Well, we want to make sure that we're using data responsibly, like any good researcher, any good counselor would do. We don't want to use things without intention, right? So National Career Development Association offers some guidelines for making sure that we are using presented labor data in our work with clients accurately and responsibly. And so the three sort of tests that NCDA offers us to evaluate the data that we're bringing into session is understanding that the information is, first of all, accurate. And part of that is making sure that it's coming from an accurate and reliable source. But that's again why this classification system becomes important, because it's a way for us to make sure that information is accurate, because we're talking about a unified understanding of career, and you can know if they use that classification system in analyzing the data that they're presenting. Part of that accuracy too is making sure that the data that's being presented is free from bias and that it's up to date and current. So we're not looking at outdated data and then drawing conclusions that are inaccurate. So that's the first one. It's pretty important, is making sure that your data that you want to share with your client has been vetted from a reliable source and is considered to be as accurate and bias-free as possible. Then you want to identify the intended audience of that data and make sure it's appropriate for your clients. So you might have to translate a little bit when it comes to looking at like labor reports, to make sure that what you're applying and offering is applicable to the clients that you're serving. You don't want to give them data that really isn't relevant and then they draw incorrect conclusions about their career prospects from the data that we're offering. So we want to make sure that the way the data was collected, analyzed, and presented, we know who the intended audience was, and if it was done in a way that was very self-serving or that included some sort of like bias, or we're trying to draw certain conclusions with data mining. So on one count, we want to make sure that we understand the intended audience that the research or the labor data or statistics were created for in the first place. That's again why those federal databases are nice, because then you also want to understand who's supposed to consume this information. And if you're working from federal sites like Occupational Outlook Handbook or ONET Online, then you know that it was intended for public consumption. It was intended for use in exploring career opportunities through professionals, schools, and individuals as part of the American public. So we need to know the intended audience of like how that data was assembled and then who it's intended to be used by and for. And then we want to make sure that it's comprehensive. So we're getting a full understanding and picture of the career landscape that we're presenting to the clients. We, again, want to make sure that it's not skewed data, it's not been selected in a certain way to make the outcome look some other way than it actually is. You want to make sure that the data that you're using is from, again, reputable individuals, reputable agencies, and that includes a comprehensive view of the information that we're presenting so that we know that it's unbiased and that it is as accurate as possible so that our clients are drawing conclusions based on reliable information. Once we have determined that our source of information is reliable and accurate, unbiased and appropriate, then we have to consider how we want to go about using and sharing that data with clients. And I'm taking these from the textbook, so these come from our book authors. These are not things that I created, just being clear about associating authorship appropriately. So there's some considerations that are suggested about including things related to data and labor statistics in session. So prior to the session, you really want to consider why you're going to be introducing these things into the therapy space. So generally, what's going to be helpful for the clients and why are you bringing it into things? So is it going to help with understanding some part of the client's goal, or is this a part of the treatment plan? We don't want to ever randomly bring in any type of like activity or intervention or assessment without intention and without it being connected to some sort of like comprehensive school counseling program or some sort of treatment plan. We have to have a reason for doing these things. And so thinking about what information is going to be most helpful for the client in the context of this therapy evolution in this relationship, right? What information might be actually helpful for the client in them exploring options or understanding their choices or whatever it is their goal might be. And what type of information is going to be helpful to the client, because it can be very easy to become overwhelmed because there's so much information available on ONET and Occupational Outlook Handbook online. A lot of times I'll just teach clients how to use these things and then encourage them to explore. And if they find things that they want to further talk about or process, they can bring those to session with them. But just introducing the tools themselves sometimes work just as well as introducing the data itself. So when do I need to bring this into the therapy space? Is this an appropriate time, or am I going to be interrupting some other larger piece of work that we're doing in order to bring this in because I thought it was really cool and I wanted to share it? So having intention is important, and is it going to align with the concerns of the client or their goals or something that really originates from them? We always want to honor that autonomy piece. And so, the client may not be interested in exploring anything related to career opportunities. And then if I bring data in, it seems like I'm pushing my own bias or agenda in the space. So we really want to make sure it matches up to the client's concerns, choices, and needs. And then when we're actually going to include it, we want to be reasonable, right? So we don't want to overwhelm the client with data. To think about exactly how much information is going to be appropriate, how much we expect the client to do outside of the session. As I said before, maybe we just show them how to use these tools and then let them know they can always come back and discuss something that they find. And then thinking about like, how are we incorporating this into the session itself? Are we going to have them like take the interest in inventory or interest profiler at home and then look at the results together? Am I going to have them do it while they're in session with me? what's going to be the structure and the way that I'm building this into the session itself? And if the client brings in some information, how am I going to evaluate the accuracy and appropriateness of that information using those 3 guidelines that we just went over with NCDA? So do we know how accurate that information is? And we can't operate as if we assume it's accurate if we're not able to vet the information and make sure. And then we always want to check in with the client and make sure that they're not feeling overwhelmed, that they're understanding the data that we're offering them and the information that we're offering them, and make sure that it's what they need. So if they're really wanting to make a decision about a college major or a career change, are we giving them enough information to help support them in that decision making? Or are we overwhelming them with so much information they're not going to be able to make that decision either?